Let's look at the amazing Indian weapon, the Chakram. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and also Easton Antique Arms. And two thanks straight up at the beginning of this video. First of all, thanks to Gavin for lending me, my friend Gavin, who you see on the channel sometimes, lending me this original antique Indian Chakram to talk about. We're going to talk about the history of them, we're going to talk about where they come from, who used them, but also how they were used as well, with a little bit of help from some other friendly channels. And I also want to thank the sponsors for this video, who are CuriosityStream, but more about that later. So the first thing to say about the Chakram is it is from India. In fact, it's probably these days most famous for its usage by the Sikhs, particularly the Nihangs, and we'll come back to that a little bit later in the video. But in fact, it was used all over India, and in fact, the earliest mentions of them are all the way back in the 5th century BC. These are mentioned in things like the Mahabharata, and they are shown being wielded by gods. Just before we go back to looking at the Chakram, I want to remind you that India has some of the most amazing and unique designs of sword and dagger and other types of weapons, like the bagnak here, also one of Gavin's. Thank you to Gavin for lending that, which you can see in a recent video I did. And India is incredibly innovative when it comes to weapon design, and the Chakram, which has had an effect on modern media in ways you may be aware of, is no exception to that. It is basically a unique weapon to India. Although we do perhaps find similar weapons in certain other areas at certain other times, some of those seem to have been influenced by the Indian version. So let's look at the history of the Chakram and also who used it and how. But super briefly, I want to talk about our amazing sponsors for this video, who are CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream offers a massive collection of exclusive content. It's got exclusive shows, documentaries, films that you can't find anywhere else. And it's got an absolutely massive library of content, including history, military history, science and nature, arts, loads and loads of stuff. Basically, CuriosityStream has got something for everyone. And one of the other great things is, as well as the massive corpus of material that's already there, new material lands every single week. So there's new stuff being added all the time. And while it is a subscription service, the plans start at under $5 a month. So it's really, really affordable. There's also annual plans and monthly plans, so you can choose whatever suits you. And of course, you can watch it absolutely anywhere, whether you want to sit on your sofa at home and watch it on your big television, whether you're on the move, on the train, on the bus, you can watch it on your phone. And of course, it would also therefore make a great gift for someone. Two titles I've been really getting into in the last week are The Real Wild West, always a great topic, and also Napoleon, The Beginning of the End. So if you want to check out CuriosityStream today, it's as simple as this. All you need to do is go to curiositystream.com/Schola Gladiatoria or scan my QR code on screen now to try out unlimited access to some of the best documentaries and non-fiction content you can find. And specifically for my followers here, if you use the promo code Schola Gladiatoria, you'll get 25% off an annual subscription, which would also be a great gift. So click the link below, scan the QR code on screen, or go to curiositystream.com/Schola Gladiatoria to get 25% off. And thanks to CuriosityStream for sponsoring this channel, this video, and giving a special offer to my fans here. So let's get back to the main content of this video, looking at the Chakram, also known sometimes as a chakra. A small one would be a chakri, but basically all related words. And English sources, it should be noted, if you're ever searching in historical British sources from the 19th century, for example, they often refer to this as a quoit. A quoit is a throwing ring. Okay, so essentially what this is. But the indigenous word, the Indian word, is essentially Chakram, spelt in various different ways or various different forms, sometimes chakra. So this is a throwing disc. When did it come about? Well, as far as we know, it was already in existence by the 5th century BC. We don't really know where they appeared. Archaeology hasn't helped us, art hasn't helped us, but they are mentioned. So throwing rings like this are mentioned in really, really early Indian sources. And they're mentioned again in the 2nd century BC. So it seems that they were a typical Indian weapon hundreds of years before the modern era, before Christ. Prevalent all over India as far as we can tell. So much so that even Hindu gods wielded them. Perhaps the most obvious and famous example being Vishnu, who's always shown, or pretty much always shown, holding a chakram. If we take someone like the god Ravan, for example, they have multiple weapons in their multiple arms, but the chakram is also included there as well. Now, if we come forward in time, these were still certainly being used all the way through really to even the 20th century in some cases, but certainly used quite extensively up until the 19th century. And in the 16th century, there started to be a lot of European contact in India, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, of course, the French as well. So one of the earliest writers to talk about these was a Portuguese writer in the year 1516, a guy called Duarte Barbosa. Now, Duarte Barbosa actually refers to these. He refers to various weapons, actually, that he's experiencing in and around Delhi at the time. This is 1516, so early 16th century. And amongst the various other weapons he talks about the good quality of the swords and the axes and daggers and various other things. He mentions these, and he refers to them as a chakrani or something like this, I think, but essentially chakra. And it's clearly these he's talking about. And he says they're about the size of a dinner plate. Yeah, a small dinner plate, I think he says. And he says that they are edged around the outside, blunt on the inside, and that these are placed on the finger, spun around and thrown. We'll come to the throwing method in a little bit. But it's interesting that he mentions that already in the year 1516, and also that he's talking about it in Delhi, which presumably, possibly at that time means under Mughal kind of rulership. It's a sultanate. Essentially, he describes these as a noteworthy throwing weapon, and he talks about them being stored on the arm, worn on the arm in a number, having several of them, being pulled off, spun around the finger, thrown at enemies at some distance, and it being able to cut into their arms and legs. So this is a weapon of, not bow shot range or anything like that, but it is something that you can use at range before closing in on an enemy. Now, these chakram were used, as mentioned, by lots of different people in India right the way through this period, through the 16th century, 17th, 18th centuries. By the 19th century, we find that these are often, certainly by British writers, associated specifically with the Sikhs, who still use them, and in fact still use them today in traditional martial arts like Shastra Vidya. And one of the seminal works of the time was by Lord Egerton of Tatton, who published a book in 1880 on Indian weapons. And in that, he demonstrated ones that he collected he'd started collecting in about 1857 after the so-called Indian Mutiny. And in fact, in here, we can actually see it's titled A Sikh Throwing the Quoit. So quoit being a throwing disc to British writers of the time. And you'll notice that the person in question has their finger through the centre and they're spinning it around like that. We will come back to that point in a little bit. But fundamentally, these weapons were found still extensively being used by the Sikhs, particularly by the Nihangs. Now, in terms of how they were being carried, there are essentially three ways that we find. So one of those is them being placed around the turban, a number of different sized ones. And we still find this today. They're still traditionally worn by the traditional Nihang in India. And they're basically stacked on top of the turban, and they can be pulled off there and thrown. The other place that we commonly see them being worn, and in fact are mentioned a lot in the sources being worn, is on the left arm. They can also be worn on the right arm as well, but they seem to be the left arm predominantly in the written sources. And they can have a bunch of them on here of different sizes on the arm, and they can be pulled off at will and hurled at opponents. The final one is sometimes you find very large ones that go right the way over the turban and over the head and actually worn around here. And this is also shown in period art of the Nihang as well. So around the neck, around the head, or around the hat rather, the turban, and around the arms, but specifically, or most popularly, I think, the left arm. So they could be worn in various places and worn in multiples. They could be thrown singularly, or they could be thrown in multiples as well. And there is this idea alluded to in various sources that a handful of them could be thrown in one go, or they could be held in one hand and quickly thrown one after the other. Now, before we look at how they might have been thrown, because that's an interesting topic in itself, I want to make clear that there are two main types of these throwing discs. Some of them do seem to be flat, and some of them have a construction that is a bit like a wing, or if you're familiar with the Araby throwing disc, which was modelled on these. So in fact, this one is one of the latter. So some do seem to be flat. Okay, some are flat, some are decorated as well, but obviously you get plain ones and you get decorated ones. But in terms of the actual form, some are flat, like a flat disc, and some are curved, so the top edge here is actually curving down like the top of a wing, and the under edge is actually curving downwards. Now what this has is this has an aerodynamic effect which creates lift, essentially because the pressure above the wing is less than the pressure under the wing, which causes the thing to rise roughly corresponding to the fall from gravity, which means that when you throw, I expect you've all seen throwing an aerobie, when you throw an aerobie it seems to travel in a long straight line. It's also a little bit like how airsoft guns do backwards spin with a hop-up unit. So essentially the thing will travel a lot further than you expect, which means that the flat disc rings will not fly as far as these. They might possibly penetrate a target more easily. So it could be, and this is my conjecture, that the flat ones or flatter ones are for short range, and the very aerodynamically designed ones for travelling further are for long range. These might do less damage, but they might travel further. So there's always a trade-off with these things. If one type was universally better than the other, they would only make one type, wouldn't they? So the fact is there must be some different advantages to the two types. It should also be said this is more difficult to make because of course you've got to get that angle right. But one of the unusual features of these is when you think about the usual distance you could throw a knife or a tomahawk or something like that, you can throw these further because of that aerodynamic effect. They seem to glide along and go a long, long way. And there are records of these commonly being thrown up to about 50 meters, very, very far for a hand-thrown weapon that isn't something like a javelin, and something you can have multiples of. But there are also records of these going as far as 100 meters. Okay, now, I think we need to test this at some point, so maybe we need to make some, maybe I need to get together with someone like Todd or maybe some Shasta video people and maybe we can make a video out of this. So if there's an appetite for that, then post below and tell us and maybe we'll look into it. But that's an amazing range for a throwing weapon of this sort. So finally, let's look at how these are thrown. Well, I'm not going to throw this because it's an antique and it doesn't belong to me. Okay, so quite simply, this is a valuable antique. I don't want to destroy it. But there are some people in the world making replicas of these, both the flat ones and the ones with this slight form here. The two main people who I know personally who've tested these are Schola and Adam Saladin. Now, Adam is a world-class thrower of sharp objects. He throws knives and axes and chakram very, very well. And what's interesting is he outlined a few ways that you could throw this plausibly and the different strengths and weaknesses. And so did Schola as well. And fundamentally, you can go and watch their videos, and I'll link both their videos below. But fundamentally, these can be thrown like a frisbee or an aerobie from the outside line, from the outside line, the inside line, or vertically like this, holding it like you would hold a frisbee, basically, how you'd hold an aerobie. But you have to bear in mind that this is a sharp edge. In some cases, it could be really, really razor sharp. So you have to hold it in a way where you're not going to cut yourself, obviously. Okay, so bear that in mind if you go experimenting, do it at your own risk. So it can be thrown in any of the ways you'd conventionally throw like a frisbee, and indeed it can be thrown upwards as well. And Adam actually demonstrated that very, very well, which of course, if you've just pulled the thing off your arm and someone's at close range, suddenly deploying it and throwing it in their face from below could be a really good surprise attack. So any of the typical ways, typical angles you throw a frisbee or an aerobie, you could throw this. But in addition, we've got this finger thing. So I've kept saying I'll come back to that. So there is this idea, I'll spin it around my arm, there is this idea that you can spin this like a hula hoop around your finger. I'm not going to do it in here because that's just going to go horribly wrong. But in lots of the art and lots of the written sources, we see these references, especially to Sikh practitioners, of spinning it around the finger and then throwing it there. There is also mention of having a sword in one hand and spinning it continuously around the left finger. So basically, it's a bit like having a gun in your offhand. You can fight with your sword and then deploy the chakram anytime you want. Now, both Schola and Adam Saladin both found that not very effective. However, as a martial arts practitioner and with someone who has a lot of respect for Indian history and Indian martial arts, I suspect there might be a practice issue here. So nothing against Schola, nothing against Adam, because they hadn't really practiced a lot spinning it around the finger, and I certainly haven't. So I'm not in a position to speak from strength on that. But someone who has done this quite a lot is Nidar Singh, a practitioner of Shasta Vidya. And he seems to have practiced spinning it around the finger and throwing it a lot more. And as you can see, he gets probably better results than other people who've just tried this for the first or fifth time. If you do it for a long time, I suspect that there's a technique to it. And Skal actually started to sort of unveil some ideas about that in his video. So, you know, I'm not here to write off, I'm not here to say that something's right or something's wrong. All I will say is that as far as the written historical sources are concerned, spinning it around the finger is definitely something which comes up time and time again and is shown in art by British writers and Portuguese writers and all sorts. So it clearly must have been done. Why did they do it? I don't know exactly, but it must have some advantages. So it's an interesting talking point, and maybe something, again, we could look at in future videos. So there we go. Without going on for too much longer, I hope that's given you a really good overview of the fact that the Chakram has been an Indian weapon for hundreds and hundreds of years, going back to the 5th century, the 2nd century BC. Well, you know, before the time of the Romans. It's been around for a super long time and was still being used in the 19th century, and to some extent it was still being used for displays and kind of, you know, festivals and stuff in the 20th century, and it's still being used today by practitioners of traditional Indian martial arts. So an incredibly almost unique weapon in the world, the famous Chakram from India, still alive and kicking after 1,500 years of use, and an absolutely awesome weapon that I think we should probably practice with and learn more about and find out what's that finger spinning thing all about. Anyway, thanks again to the sponsors for this video. Thanks especially to Gavin for lending me his original antique Chakram to play with here. I need to go and oil it now that I've handled it liberally. And also thanks to Skal, Adam Seldin and also Nidar Singh for all of the content you produced, which has helped me get a better view on how these might have been used. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. I have been Matt Easton, and I will continue to be. See you soon, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.